Okay, I am so excited to have Mecham here tonight because she will be talking about some very significant things with regard to, and here she is over here, and her on the second half of this presentation, she's going to be talking about that. She's a Lister sister, and she's going to be talking about the actual process and decoding and some of the things that the Lister sisters have done with regard to Ann Lister's journals. But I'm going to start right now. So I got a few things I have to say. This is not working for some reason. Oh, I see. Hold on. This there. No, is it not working? Okay, it's not working. So I have to press this to advance it. I hope that works. Yeah, okay. Be sure to be recording. Okay, I am. Okay, so that's good. If you're on Zoom and you don't want to be recorded, just turn off your camera and then you will not be, your pictures won't be on there. I just want to talk about COVID-19 and safety. Wear your masks at all time and correctly at all times unless eating and drinking. If you're eating and drinking, stay seated so you don't be walking around and talking to people while you're not covered with your mask. Observe social distancing as most you can. If you are in a pod, you can be sitting close to somebody, but if not, be sure to have a little bit of space. Wash your hands and use hand sanitizer. Your mom was right. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, says the best way to avoid being seriously ill is to be vaccinated. And here's a note about that. All Pennsylvanians age 5 and older are eligible to receive a COVID-19 vaccine. In Pennsylvania, as of November 19th, Acting Secretary of Health Allison Beam has announced that all adults in Pennsylvania are now eligible to schedule a COVID-19 vaccine booster. Please do that if you have not done so already. See our website for our COVID info page or talk to our center's health department staff to find out how to get a COVID vaccine or booster or a flu vaccine. We have been instrumental in vaccinating many people through our flu vaccine program, even going to area libraries and doing that. We also have vaccinated about 500 people for COVID here as well. Vaccines are mandated for all of our staff. And it seems to me that all who have been or are eligible for boosters have had them. The Bradbury-Sullivan, oh, I already said that. Okay. And as of way back, here's a cool thing. As of way back in June 2021, 92% of LGBTQ people are vaccinated in Pennsylvania and across the United States. And the percent is even higher now because that was way back in June, because this is not our first epidemic. And we believe in science. In fact, statistics also say that 92% of us believe in science and believe in vaccines. Yay, team. So, be proud of our heritage. And this is who I am. I'm Liz Bradbury. My pronouns are she, her. I have this on my mask. I just got this mask. I'm the director of the Training Institute of the Bradbury-Sullivan LGBT Community Center in Allentown, and I do LGBTQ equity and awareness trainings, but I love to talk about LGBTQ history, and that's what we're doing tonight in this 6th series of these art and history from a queer perspective classes and talks that we've been doing here at the center. Here's more of my reminders. Okay, thank you for everybody for coming. There will be sex in the talking tonight. If you're uncomfortable, people are applauding, that's a good thing. Be aware that if you're uncomfortable about sort of graphic sex talk, that's what Ann Lister did, and Michelle's part is about that in some aspects. So be aware that if you're going to be uncomfortable, I don't think there's anybody here who's too young for that. I was going to say the college students, but that's ridiculous. So for Zoom folks, we're recording this, and as I said, if you don't want to be seen, you can turn off your cameras. Hope you can all come to next week's classes. There's 2 more classes after this. Thank you, Trish, for the wonderful food. And I want to say again that the potato leek soup, the leeks are from our garden. It's vegan and gluten-free. The oat cakes are vegan and gluten-free. And the cake, the other cake is not, but it's delicious. And there's also beverages and Yorkshire tea. And all of these are sort of English themed things. Oh, there's more people coming in. They're English things. And so that's after Ann Lister. Ann Lister was from Yorkshire, so that's why, from the York area. So that's one of the reasons why we're having Yorkshire tea, which Michelle turned us on to. Thank you to tonight's volunteers and staff, always the wonderful Tarika Kay, who is in the back, who is helping with the food, who's been here for almost every one of our presentations. She's so terrific. The fabulous Bradbury-Sullivan, and also our staff members who are here, Abby Hochfeld and Robin Gao and Liz Kaiser, who's out there. Do we have any other stuff? Is that everybody? Okay, so thank you all of you for helping out. Oops. Please leave a small donation. The donation thing, we should move that over to where the food is. The small donation holder is over here if you want to put some cash money in there. You can also use a credit card if you want to make a little donation. Gabby can help you doing that with one of our credit card readers and make that very easy. Please do it. Because last week we had 47 people here. We got about 20 bucks. So I'm like, come on, make a little donation. You don't have to, but it would be very helpful if you did. Please, everyone, take this opportunity to make new friends when we're done. You can have an opportunity to socially distance chat with people. And I hope that you'll do that, because after all, you already have two things in common with these folks. Everybody in the room would be willing to come to an LGBT community center, one, and two, they're all into this stuff. So now you've got two things in common with them. That's a pretty big deal. Be sure to look at the art shows if you didn't get a chance to do so already. And there are prizes tonight, and they're really cool prizes. So what they are Wade figurines. The Wade China company has been a long-term producer of beautiful figurines in the in England and in Britain, and I think they've been around for well into the early 19th century. So how cool is that? Plus, at the end, we're going to have a really cool little competition, and there's a great prize for that. And we have our prize distributing volunteer who is going to be, who's the prize? Oh, Emma. Where's Emma? There she is over there. She or they is over there, and Emma is going to be giving out the prizes. So if you answer a brilliant question, or you answer a question brilliantly, you will get a prize. Be sure to be recording. Okay, I am recording. I'm on the recording thing. Okay, Ann Lister. Ann Lister, 1791 to 1840. She is Gentleman Jack. She was on the television as Gentleman Jack in the BBC production of the show, Gentleman Jack, and there's Sir Ann Jones portraying her. She was from Calderdale in Yorkshire, Yorkshire Tea, England, and there she is with the love of, or the woman she married, Anne Walker. And that's the person playing her. Obviously, these are not really them. It's Sir Ann Jones and Sophie Rundle as Anne Walker. And they've actually let me use these pictures because I used them for some other presentations. There they are together. And this depiction of Gentleman Jack is not too off. We don't have pictures of Anne Walker, but we do have a couple of paintings of Ann Lister, so we can see how much she really looks like her. There they are together, and yes, they do get it on. Here is the best painting of Ann Lister, and this is what she looked like to the painter, to the artist of the day, way back in the early 1800s. I think this was painted in the 1830s. So here's something that she said in her diary. I love and only love the fairer sex, and thus beloved by them in turn. My heart revolts from any other love than theirs. And she said that in 1821. Ann Lister's 29-volume journal. Her diaries flouted convention and have been recognized by the United Nations as a pivotal document in British history. Even if they had not had really graphic sex in them, now you're all staying, they'd be significant as just a detailed snapshot of everyday life in Georgian England. And you're going to see why that is. So, but when you talk about Ann Lister, it's all about her journals, because her journals are magnificent. And from a queer perspective, they're gold. They mean everything to us. Now, this is a little idea of why I always do this, and some people really think this is stupid, but including Trish, it's like, why do you talk about the timeline all the time? But I always do this because she thinks it's stupid, but she thinks that, I dwell too much on this. But I think it's important to point out that Anne Lister's life, there it is on the timeline. So you can see 1800 is right in the middle of it. And so if you think about Jane Austen, Emma, Pride and Prejudice, that's her career, and it's in Anne Lister's life. So that means that Anne Lister, who lived near Jane Austen, would have known about her writing. She's fairly famous even in her lifetime. And also Anne Lister talks about Lord Byron's poetry, which is very romantic all the time, and he also was producing things during her time. Her father, Anne Lister's father, actually fought in the Revolutionary War, and you can see the American Revolutionary War comes before this. But she lived through the French Revolution and the Napoleonic War. And the Napoleonic War was France, led by Napoleon, fighting against everybody. And he was fighting also and trying to position himself to take over Britain. So that influenced her life very significantly. It ended in 1815. And there you can see the US Civil War is much later. So here's another picture of Anne Lister, and Michelle and I agree, we've talked a lot about this, that this couldn't be more unattractive. I mean, really, like when this person was done, did she go, did you have to make me look like I had a beard? Because she didn't. But she did kind of. She was 5'4", she was short, but she always wore strong men's boots. She was absolutely a formidable character, and everybody agrees with that. She had a swift gait in heavy leather man-style boots. She walked around like people should get out of her way. There's no question about it. And she was a genius. And I say that about every famous woman that I talk about, but this is absolutely true. Everybody wanted to know Anne Lister because when she spoke about things, she was so knowledgeable that people were entranced by what she said. She was fiercely intelligent. She had boundless energy. She would get up in the morning, walk and walk and walk all day, get around, do stuff. She was very, very significant with regard to the work that she did. She was an avid reader. She had a very, very large library that was very important to her. And she remembered the information. If she read something, she remembered it. For a good time, if she had a day free, she would spend 10 hours practicing French verbs and then remember it all and write about that in her journal. She spoke French, Greek, and German, and probably some other languages as well. And she inherited Shibden Hall, which is a significant thing with regard to this presentation in her life, which was the Lister family estate in Yorkshire. Shibden Hall was originally built in the 15th century. And she was a diarist. She was a journalist. Her journals are the most important thing about her history because she wrote these magnificent and important journals. And she was a lesbian lover of women. And there's no question about that. Now, Anne lived with her parents in Market Weighton. And here's a little snapshot of England. That little red dot is showing where she grew up when she was a young child. And then but her aunt and uncle lived in Shibden Hall, and she would frequently go there. And then she ended up moving to Shibden Hall, and that was her base of operations. She visited Shibden Hall in Halifax, and that's where it is in Halifax. And to see where that is in regard to the whole country of England, you can see there it is right in the middle. And then London is down in the southern area, a little bit to the east. And London is about 200 miles from where she was. Shibden Hall and Market Weighton, where she grew up, is about 60 miles from each other. Now, she had an Uncle James, and here he is, and that's a real painting of him of the day, and her aunt. And her aunt and uncle, who were brother and sister, lived in Shibden Hall, and that's when she visited them. She would go there to visit them. And her Uncle James was the oldest son. So a whole lot of her life and everybody's life, if you've read any of the Jane Austen novels, you know it's all about heredity and who inherits what and how it pretty much sucks for women. Because if there's any man, they're going to get to inherit. So Uncle James was the oldest son, and her father, Anne's father, was a later son. So Uncle James, who was single and didn't have any kids, owned and was in control of Shipton Hall. And his sister also, there's a picture of her, also lived with her. And by the way, there's a lot of Annes in this story. It's an Annathon. It absolutely is. Because her name was Aunt Ann Lister. So now it's just to be extra confusing. Her name was Aunt Ann Lister. And also to be confusing. So you can see there's two different movies that have come out in the last 11 years about this. One of them is called The Secret Diaries of Ann Lister. And even though it says Secret Diaries, it's mostly not about the journals. But the second movie, and we'll see this in a second. Oh, and this woman here is playing Aunt Ann Lister in that movie. This is a woman named Gemma Jones. And then there's a movie called Gentleman Jack. And many of you know that I was playing the music at the beginning. And that was a BBC series of shows with Sir Ann Jones. And that's much more scholarly and much more specific to her journal. Although Anne wrote such incredible stuff in her journal that the dialogue that she actually said, which she recounted over and over again in her journals, is dialogue that you see in these shows. So it's stuff that she really said, or at least she really remembered herself saying. And then in that one, this is the other woman who plays Ann Lister in Gentleman Jack. It's the same person. It's Gemma Jones. I mean, do you think like during the audition, they said, do you have any experience playing this? And she said, well, 9 years ago, I played the same part. So that's a little bit confusing in itself. So this guy, he's the guy who plays Anne's father, Jeremy Lister. And he's in Gentleman Jack, it's played by Timothy West. And he, as I said, that he fought in the American Revolution, and Anne really rubbed it in that he fought for the losing side. He had to, this is a guy who had to get on a ship, sail to the Americas, fight in the Revolutionary War. He fought in the battles of Concord and Lexington, and then lose and get the hightail it out of her. He was wounded a little bit by getting shot in the elbow, and then he came back. He lived in Shipton Hall, but he didn't have any income, so he just sort of lived off the beneficent of his brother, and he didn't have a job. He'd been a soldier, but he didn't really have a job, so he just lived there. And he had some pretty severe deafness, and that was one of his bigger problems. So he was there in Shipton Hall growing up, and Anne went frequently when he ultimately moved to Shipton Hall, and would come and be there with him. This is a depiction of her mother. It's not really her mother because there weren't any pictures of her, but that's the way women dressed in 1817 if they were in mourning. And so her mother, whose name was Rebecca Battle Lister, she died in 1817 when Anne was about 25 years old. They together had 6 children and 4 boys and 2 girls. But here's the thing that happened. Only Anne and her younger sister Marion lived to be an adult. So she was the second child. The first child was a boy, but he died in a couple of days. And then the rest of the boys either died then, or then there was one other brother named Sam who died in a battle because he was a soldier. And so what was left was Anne, who was the oldest of the Anne of Marion, and Marion was her younger sister. And so because of that, there weren't any other men in the family except for now her father, because ultimately, Uncle James dies. Mom couldn't control Anne, so she sent her away to school when she was 7, but they sent her back because she was willful and probably way smarter than the teachers, and they whipped her every day for her tomboyness. She loved being a student, but she pretty much hated the school because they were not comfortable with her because they thought she was so naughty that if she was around other girls, she would make them naughty too. How many of us were like that? These people, so this woman on the right is the woman who played Marion in Gentleman Jack. And she's actually a very funny character. So if you haven't seen this, you should definitely watch it. The person on the left is Marion, because if you think about the 1800s, Marion lived to be about into her 80s. She lived to be about 82 years old. And she was born in the early 1800s. And if Ann Lister had just lived a couple of more years, there would have been photographs of her. But this is a picture of Marion when she's, in her 70s. And we all know that there are photographs of Abraham Lincoln from the 1850s and the 1860s. And so she lived into the 1880s, and there's a real photograph of her. So that's what she looks like. And actually, this woman really kind of looks like her, so it's impressive. This is a drawing. This is the only other depiction that we have of Ann Lister, and this is a drawing of her in her androgynous little boy look of when she was a child. When she was 9 years old, when Ann was 9 years old, she wrote in her in journal that she sneaked out, or she wrote she sneaked out at night to see bawdy women downtown. She'd go to the town to look at the prostitutes. And here's some prostitutes that I just threw in there just so for you to see. This is the pole. And I sort of think that it's the thing that's holding up the pole that I think we should really point out. So this is where Anne went to school. When she was 14, she had tutors, but when she was 14, she was sent to the Manor House School. And this is an actual painting of that school. And she was a brilliant student. Again, she was probably way smarter and way more capable than most of her teachers. She was very, very well read. And she shared a room with a young woman who was also 14, whose name was Eliza Rain. And they were close friends and became lovers. This is her first girlfriend. She was devoted to her, and she and Eliza were devoted to each other. Eliza's father worked for the British East India Company, where a lot of British men worked in India so that they could exploit, people in India. And Eliza was actually her father was this guy, he was a rich guy, but he was actually a doctor. But her mother was an East Indian local, and so because of that, she was mixed race, and that was uncomfortable for people in those days. And so as a result, even though, and her father died, and she actually inherited a lot of money. Her father was very, very wealthy. But even though she had a lot of money, because she was mixed race, people at this school, there's about 40 young women students at this school, they put her up in an attic bedroom, and they didn't want her to mix with anybody else because, But Anne was naughty too, because she was so willful. So they put them away in this room together. And yay, in effect. It was a successful situation for them. So yeah, so they're having this little torrid teenage affair, and they're really happy because they're together and they really don't have much in common with the other one. Anyway, so they're having a lovely time. Anne wrote that when she saw Eliza, she thought she was the most beautiful girl I ever saw. And Ann Lister was a judge of girls, and so she particularly was taken by her. So Anne was thrown out of school again because of this. There's no question that was the case. But she and Eliza were in love, and so they wrote to each other, probably in code. They used the word Felix to indicate that they were having sex, or they were, they wanted to make a little, emotional thing. They'd make a little note, and then they'd say Felix, and then they'd know what that meant. And then they wrote all of the time, but they figured out the code. And the code was important to them because in those days, if their mom had found the letters, if their moms had found the letters, and both of them had, or their relatives, or anybody else, it would be very, very bad. At that time, it was completely illegal to be a gay man. Having male sex was punishable by death. It was not as much of the issue for women because they presumed that women had no interest in sexual desire. Obviously, that wasn't true for Ann Lister, but that's what the presumption was, but it was absolutely frowned about. So Eliza and Anne figured out this code together. And in 1806, so now Eliza isn't in school anymore, but in 1806, Eliza visited Anne in Halifax. She went to Shipton Hall to visit her, and they had a lovely time. And then when she left, Anne wrote in her journal this line. She started a journal and she wrote this: Eliza left us. And that's the very first line in her journal in 1806, at the beginning of a 29-volume journal that she's about to write for the next 34 years. And she's going to write approximately 5 million words. And these are the first 3 words that she wrote. And so it's very significant that she's writing these notes back and forth, or sections of these notes that they're very direct with regard to and graphic with regard to their lives together. Now, Eliza had severe mental illness, and after a while, and not too long, actually, Anne kind of realized that their relationship, they'd sort of talked about living together forever, and that's what 13 or 15-year-olds often would say. But after a while, Anne realized that wasn't going to work out. And we don't know exactly why that is. In part, it could have been because she wanted somebody of a higher level of class. But we don't really know why that is. What we do know is that Eliza had severe mental illness. And ultimately, she was put under care of a doctor named Mecham, who turned out to be the brother of a very important person in Anne's life. And this was in York. And Anne paid, and this is not in Gentleman Jack, but Anne actually paid many visits to Eliza and went to see her. Eliza was so mentally ill that she couldn't speak within a few years. And she ultimately died in York at the age of 69, which was about 20 years after Anne died. This is the place where the doctor's office would have been. So there's Anne. And here's the thing. Most queer perspective, my queer perspective when I talk about this stuff, is based on whether or not somebody's queer on where they slept, as in Lincoln, amorous letters or poems, artistic visual clues, lack of hetero relationships, and even the occasional sodomy lawsuit like Leonardo da Vinci. But Anne, who was an autodidactic, a dauntless traveler, a scientist, a mountaineer, a resourceful businesswoman, and a bit of a snob. And wait a minute, let me just make a little comment about the snobbery. So within her journal, remember that she wrote in her journal for herself, and she wrote a lot of things in code. And when she wrote like gossipy things, she would often write those in code. And when she met people, she would often make remarks about them, like this person really smelled bad, or they had dirty nails. She was obsessed with dirty hands. She hated it when people had dirty hands or dirty fingernails. But yeah, Michelle says it makes sense, for heaven's sakes. Like we're all thinking, well, yeah. If you're thinking, so you have to think about her journal with regard to this as it's in her brain. And you know, when you meet somebody and you think, God, this person really smells bad, you're thinking that in your head, and that's what her journal did for her in a lot of ways. So I don't know if that's really snobbery. And a lot of historians, because there's a lot of historians who have read all of her journals, will say that's an indication of her snobbery. I don't think that's an indication of her snobbery. This is an indication of her snobbery, however. She was a landowner, and she was a conservative per se, a Tory. And she, at that time, they were trying to create reform laws because when, in this earlier part of her life, when she was controlling Shipton Hall, the law was that only men who owned land could vote. And they were trying to reform it so that only men could vote, but not necessarily people who had to own land. It didn't mean that everybody had to own land. So Anne was annoyed by that. And she would write, you know, I own land, but I can't vote. And some guy who doesn't even own any land, they get to vote. And I don't get to. That's pretty snobby. Now, it's important to understand that this reform passed. And after it passed, all men in Britain were allowed to vote, or at least in England, were allowed to vote in some instances. But here's the thing. It was not a private ballot. Anybody could see who you voted for. It was not everybody. That was not the right of people. So if you're a landowner, if you have a lot of tenants, if you have a lot of employees, you can simply say, if you vote for this person, you cannot live at your farm anymore that is on my 400-acre land. And that's what she did. Now, this is not rare. I mean, this kind of thing happens all the time. She didn't think it was bad. But and she believed it was the right thing to do. But of course, I think that's a pretty snobby thing to do. Now let's go back to the queer perspective, because we always like that. We know that Anne Lister loved women. We absolutely know that. And she also shagged them. We know that. She loved them, and she was irrefutably a lesbian. And we know exactly how she shagged them. And Michelle will point this out to you by some actual quotes, because she recorded it all in her 29. And this thing had 7,722 pages in her diary. Conservative historians, and we know this happens, were like, well, you know, they weren't really, so Emily Dickinson wrote these love letters to Sue Gilbert, but how do we know that they really had sex? I think you're making that up. You know, no, I think it's true. So Lincoln slept in the same bed with Joshua Speed for 3 years, but how do we know they really had sex? We really know that Anne Lister had sex. And so because we know this, and Michelle's going to explain that exactly how we know this, but we know that it makes her the first lesbian. She's the first real lesbian. Now, she referred to her own sexual orientation as her oddity, okay? There was no word lesbian in those days that meant gay women. If you remember last week when I was saying that lesbian meant that you lived on the island of Lesbos? Yes. She actually has that in her diary, and she's talking about lesbians who live on the island of Lesbos. And she apparently maybe had used the word sapphic at one point, but for the most part, that was not in the parlance of people. They didn't speak that way about people, but we do now, and she was a lesbian, no question about it. And here's the important thing about Anne, one of the many important things. She never felt that being gay was wrong. She was extraordinarily introspective with regard to writing her thoughts every day and deliberating and thinking about what she was saying and what she was doing. And she was honest with herself. Like, she would come out of something and say, that didn't work out well. What was wrong? Let me think about what I should do. And she wrote these kinds of things. And historians, all the people that are really very close to the history of her, would say that she was incredibly well adjusted. And part of that was this constant introspection with regard to writing all of these things. She also absolutely believed that God wanted her to be a lesbian. And so, lots of people, even today, believe that that the Bible and that all sorts of aspects of their religion would tell them that they are sinful and wrong and bad. But Anne really read the Bible carefully. She really interpreted the Bible. She was an Anglican, like Episcopalian kind of thing. And she felt that it was, if God hadn't wanted her to be a lesbian, she wouldn't want to have sex with women. And she did. So she absolutely felt that, and she believed that that was supportive. You know, if you look in the Bible, there's only one line in the entire Bible that says that women having sex with women is bad. There are 400 lines in the Bible that says you shouldn't be rich, that you are a bad person if you're rich. So I think it's a really significant thing that she discerned that. And 18. If any of you have been around as queer people in your lifetime and been activists, you'll know that most of the discrimination that you have felt, and this is true for me as well, was often done in the name of religion. She believed those people were absolutely wrong. And that's one of the reasons that she was really well adjusted and really comfortable with who she was. She knew that she could get in trouble for it, but she didn't think it was wrong. So yay, Anne. There's that line again, Eliza left us, and that was the beginning of her journal. It is the longest English language journal in history. And she wrote it for, as I said, 34 years. And she wrote a sixth of it in code. So this is the code, and you have sheet with the code on. And this is one of the journals. And there you can see some of the stuff. And Michelle and I have been talking about this a lot in the last few days when we were discussing this presentation. We said that one of the things about her pages and pages of journal is she doesn't have a lot of things where she's scratching it out and saying this is a mistake. She doesn't have a lot of ink blots. It's amazing how she would write in these books that were made for her. And there's one little line, I think, crossed out in about 6 lines from the top of that paragraph. But she seemed to be very deliberate when she was writing. She was brilliant. Michelle's going to tell you about how this journal was found because it was hidden, what's hot in it, and how it was decoded. Now, Anne, in the journal, she described her girlfriends. Now, lots of times, a lot of the presentations about and information about her life makes it seem as though she's kind of a prurient, stereotypical lesbian predator. Why don't we come in contact with them enough? I think that's a problem with that. But Anne had about 12 relationships with women in her career, in her 35-year career as a lesbian having sex with women. And so that's not so many, you think? So she had these relationships with women, and she wrote about them very clearly. And one of the things she wrote very clearly was she was generally happier to give than receive, if you understand what I mean. And if you don't, Michelle will explain that to you. Now, this woman is the actress who's playing Isabella Northcliffe, who is Tib. They called her Tib. She went by that name. And Tib was actually a hard-drinking butch lesbian. And I don't think this person was playing this in the Secret Diaries movie. I don't think she was butch enough. Tib was really butch, and she had probably dirty hands. She and Anne were lifetime friends. They met in York, and Eliza Rain, when she was living in York, she was in society circles in some ways, and so Anne met these people at the Northcliffe's house, and that was her first instance of being able to be around really rich people. And Isabella Tib, she would shoot, and she would cuss, and she would drink at parties and be really outspoken, and shagged Anne a lot. I mean, they really had a lot of sex and stuff. They were lovers for a while, but they weren't the perfect couple, and but it was a wealthy society family, and as I said, she lived in New York. Now, this is this actor who played in the first movie, played Mariana Belcom. And Mariana, Anna, another Anne, is many people and historians, and here's the woman in Gentleman Jack who played Mariana. And this is actually a drawing of Mariana. This is a calling card that she had. This is a real drawing of her. And this is a real painting of her. And she was very, very beautiful. And Anne's type included that she liked pretty girls. She liked pretty women who had a lot of money. Yeah. And some say that Mariana Belcom was the love of her life. And I think even Anne would have said that Mariana was the love of her life. And she met her at Tib's house. And she fell for her. They were attracted to each other right away. And they had a very intense relationship that started up and meant a great deal to Anne. In fact, Anne says that Mariana was a great lover. And she describes that, among other things, heed this, that at the moment of orgasm, Mariana would say great stuff. Like she would say, that was delicious, or she would say, that was ecstasy. And she also said to Anne after these bouts of fabulous lovemaking, how could you possibly love anybody else? And one of the instances in Anne's diary, she said 2 good O's. She actually said something else, which Michelle will describe. 2 good, climaxes last night and 3 this morning. And this was like, Mariana was great. They were young, but still. On the other hand, Tib, not as good. And she, in fact, at one recounting, she says, Tib was as dry as a stick. If If you think that's too much, just wait, because we're going to hear more stuff. So, and in fact, other people she commented on the fact that the reason that she could have had a relationship with Tib, truthfully, Tib wanted her, but it was 2 Jacks, 2 Toms, 2 Butches. That's what Jack really means. So, and it wasn't right. But Mariana, beautiful, and Anne really loved her. And so she's in a relationship with Mariana. So there's Mariana Bellcom. Mariana Bellcom suddenly in 1816 marries this guy whose name is Charles Lawton. And he's about 30 years older than she is, but he's rich. He's really rich. And Mariana had promised Anne, and they were planning that she would come to live in Shipton and they would spend their lives together. But Anne at 26, when this happened, she's devastated. She was absolutely devastated. And it was in 1816. And so she vows to wear black every day for the rest of her life. And she does. This scene is actually from the movie where coming from the wedding. And she does wear that. That's why she's wearing the black. That's why I'm wearing the black, for heaven's sakes. But on the other hand, Anne goes on the honeymoon with them, which is a pretty typical thing of the day. That Mariana's sister also went, Mariana's sister also went on the honeymoon. That would usually be what happened. And apparently Anne had sex with Mariana in a room next to where Charles Lawton was snoring. She could actually hear him on the honeymoon, which is a pretty significant thing. And Anne also had sex with Anne Bellcom, another Anne, who was Mariana's sister, on the honeymoon. They were all doing this at the same time. Now, when you say this kind of stuff, and we talk about, the possibility that Anne Lister is being sort of a sexual predator or something like that, she wasn't a sexual predator. There's not that many women. But on the other hand, when you understand this, you have to think about in 1840 or in 1830, this is 1816 actually, there's no vocabulary about what a lesbian relationship is supposed to be like. And in fact, truthfully, men and women who married, the man always had other relationships with other women all the time. And so that was kind of the model of a relationship. And yes, people were jealous. There's no question about that. Now, a year later, so Anne Lister's pissed off at Mariana, and she says, "Forget it. I'm not going to be around you anymore." And then a year later, they get back together. But she's still married to Charles Lawton. And they actually resume their relationship, and they exchange rings, and they exchange other stuff that Michelle will tell you about. But in August 1823, so now this is 7 years later. So they're seeing each other all the time. And for Mariana to be able to go on a trip, she has to go past Shibden Hall. So she'd stop over for a couple of nights, which she did a lot, and they'd see each other. And one time in 1823, Anne is so excited because Mariana's on her way and they're going to have a fun time. So she walks across the fields 12 miles. In the process, it torrentially rains. And then she sees the coach coming. You've all been here, right? And she sees the coach coming and she thinks, oh, honestly, she waves down the coach, and the coach stops, and she jumps 3 steps up into the coach, and Mariana is asleep. She actually wakes up, takes a look at her, and just is pissed off. She thinks she looks so awful, and she says negative things about it. What are you doing here? The coachman's going to see you. Her sister and brother-in-law were in the coach. Is that right? Sister and brother-in-law. And there was another guy, and I guess her sister, and then there was another guy and his sister, and I don't know, all this kind of stuff. And she's like, oh, pissed off. And Anne was so excited. And in her journal, for the rest of her time, with regard to Mariana, she talks about that as the 3 steps. She took those 3 steps. That was the beginning of the end of their closeness and their relationship. And in fact, soon after that, they're walking together, and Anne actually says, "Do you have a problem with me? Are you ashamed of me?" And Mariana says that her masculine appearance makes her uncomfortable, makes her ashamed. And Anne's pissed off because she doesn't feel there's any reason to be ashamed of who she is. 18. She calls her Fred all the time. I thought that was interesting. So there's Charles Lawton. And he, as I said, he had an income of about $6,000, 6,000 pounds a year. Anne figured out her income was about 800 pounds a year. 800 pounds a year would be the equivalent of about $100,000 today, which sounds like a lot of money, but not if you want to be a really rich person that travels around and does all sorts of things. 6,000 pounds would be more like $1 million a year. And that's one of the reasons that Mariana thought, okay, so he's unattractive, but let's get married anyway. I think that's kind of the circumstance. So Charles Lawton gave Mariana an STD. One of the things he did was he shagged the women who worked in his house. He sexually assaulted women in the fields. He went to prostitutes all the time. And so they gave him an STD, or he took it, and then he gave it to Mariana. And she gave it to Anne. So probably it was syphilis. In those days, and I guess today too, syphilis doesn't mean that you're going to die. It means you're going to die in about 8% of the time, but you can have a lot of complications from it. The problem is that today there's a cure, antibiotics, then there was not. So Anne went to Paris, and Paris was the medical center of the world in those days, to consult the venereal disease doctor so that she could find out how to get better. And one of the things that we can really say about this, if a historian says, well, you don't really know if they had sex, maybe she just wrote that. Well, here's the evidence. She got syphilis from her. You don't just get, and I said this to Michelle the other day, I said, you don't just get this through, like, it's not like a doorknob or a toilet seat. They didn't even have toilets in those days. And that was in 1822. So, I'm behind. So both Mariana and the wars are over, the Napoleonic Wars are over. And the next 15 years, Anne goes on all through Europe and visits 12 nations, exploring and learning. And she went to France, and she studied Greek, algebra, French, mathematics, geology, astronomy, and philosophy. And this is actually a building where she rented an apartment. This is today, but she rented the third floor apartment. You could go stay in that apartment. How cool would that be? That was the way France looked at the time in Paris. She loved Paris. She thought it was fabulous, and she studied all these wonderful things. And science, she would go and listen to speakers, and scientists and professors were astounded by her vast knowledge and her understanding. And she rented a space in an attic room so that she could do dissections and had people bring her body parts from the medical school. So she dissected a skull, and she had a head and an arm and some fetuses. It's what you do when you go on a trip. And as a result of that, she really began to understand anatomy much better than most other people. She also really explored her own body to figure out what was going on in there. And this was a time when women were barred for universities. This is Oxford, and she was absolutely barred for going there, although she was a lot smarter than lots and lots of people. In 1822, she visited the ladies of Llangollen, and those were Eleanor Butler and Sarah Ponsonby. There they are. There's a painting of them. And these ladies, Eleanor and Sarah, were two upper-class Irish women who lived together in Wales. They had moved to Wales. And they moved to Wales because, obviously, in my mind, from a queer perspective, they were lovers, but their families told them that either they had to marry men or they had to go into a convent. And so they said, no, we're going to run away and live together. And that fascinated and scandalized their contemporaries, which they did. And they actually did this, and it was pretty famous. Was it a Boston marriage, which means a marriage where people don't really have sex, which doesn't really exist? And was it romantic? Was it a marriage-like relationship without sex? No. So Anne went to see them because she knew about them in 1822. They were older by then, because she wanted to know whether it was love or friendship, really. And she took one look at Sarah Ponsonby and went, yeah, this is not a friendship. Among other things, Sarah was really, really butch. And she treated and acted with Eleanor as though she was her wife, and she identified herself as the husband of this relationship. And Anne said, you know, there's a difference between love and friendship, and what it is in her mind was sex. That was really what it was. And also at that time, remember, I've spoken about Charlotte Cushman with lesbians in Rome. Charlotte Cushman was the most famous woman actor in the United States in the 1800s. She was a lesbian, absolutely. And wintering in Italy, which is what she did, she wintered in Italy with all these other women who were studying and making, they were artists, and they were making sculpture and stuff outside of Rome. And they were all lesbians. And so wintering in Rome was actually a euphemism for having sex, having lesbian sex. And Anne Lister actually uses that. Well, and then we wintered in Rome, you know, actually meant that they were getting it on and having a lovely time. And Charlotte Cushman had all these women in her cadre there in Rome, and they were all lesbians. So they were all in relationships with each other. So these things happened, and we really knew that this was all going on. And Anne knew it as well. She was a little bit before them, but definitely all women were doing this in going to Italy for this reason. And we know that these women were all having relationships with each other because they wrote each other very explicit letters, and they kept them, and we can see them today. Meanwhile, in Paris, Anne meets this pretty ladylike woman, Maria Barlow, because now Mariana is kind of history. This is a picture of Jane Barlow, who was Maria's daughter. And this is another picture of her. And Anne's diaries detailed every sexual erotic act they had in detail, really in detail. One of the things she said about Maria is she womanizes me too much, which means she treats me like a woman, because as a butch woman, Anne believed that she should be in charge and satisfy her partner first. And that isn't what Maria always did. She kind of jumped her a little bit more than made Anne comfortable. And then Anne met, after that in 1826, she met Vere Hobart. And Vere Hobart she was very, very attracted to her because, among other things, she had a lot of money and a lot of social aristocratic circumstances. She knew royalty. And Anne, she led Anne to Europe. They traveled together, and they went all around Europe and through Britain as well. And they did this for 6 years, and they flirted, but they didn't have sex. Not because Anne didn't want to, but because Vere kept pushing her off. Yes, this is something lesbians do. It really happens. This is a real picture of Vere Hobart when she was older. And this really shook Anne's self-confidence, and it cost her a lot of money. Apparently, Vere Hobart thought that Anne had an income of £5,000 a year. And she wanted Vere to think she was an aristocrat and she was wealthy. So she didn't tell her, no, I only get $800 a year. But one of the things she said about Vere is, I know that she really cares a lot about me because she lets me pay for everything. So she paid for a lot. There's Vere Hobart when she was quite a bit older. But then Vere gets married in 1832, and she dumps Anne. And Anne's pretty at loose ends because of that. She says, I have been Icarus, but shall fall less fatally, for I still live and be happy. Meaning she had flown up to the sun of the idea of being with somebody who was really a social aristocrat. She'd gotten to go around and meet very important people with the Hobart family. And there was money and stuff like that, but then she got dumped. And so she fell to earth, but she's still alive. So she's going to make it work out. She stayed in Paris for a while. There's a picture from Gentleman Jack. This is the very beginning of the Gentleman Jack shows where Vere is throwing her out. And so after that, Anne goes and climbs mountains. She climbs mountains in the Pyrenees. She climbs Mount Perdu. She climbs to the top of that mountain in the 1830s. And she also climbed Mount Vignemali in France, in the Pyrenees. It's between France and Spain in 1838. She was the first person. So Mount Perdu, she was the first woman to climb to the top of this. In Vignemali, she was the first person to climb to the top of this mountain ever. And there was a prince that wanted to do it. And she said, and the guide said, you know, this prince is going to do this in 3 days. She said, go now, we're going now. So they climbed to the top of the mountain. They climbed to the top of this magnificent mountain. And there are these women that are called the Blister Sisters, and they're about to recreate that climb. Here's the mountain. There it is. This is not like going to Hawk Mountain and you just walk up the trail. This is serious stuff here. And Anne was in terrific shape, and she was able to do these kinds of things. It was magnificent. Now, in 1836, her father dies, and that means she's entirely in charge now of Shipton Hall. She'd actually been managing it since 1826, but she wanted to fix it up. And so if you look at this picture, you can see that she added some things to it. And one of them was that tower that's over there on the left, which is where her library was. She had, and remember, in order for her to be able to be in control, every male relative in her life had to be dead. And that happened with other women that she was around. And if she'd married someone, whomever the man would have been in control of Shipton Hall instead of her. So she was, but now she was in control of Shipton Hall. And there's some beautiful pictures of it. It is actually a museum now, and a museum about her. And you can go to see it. Let's go on a field trip. She was an excellent and frequently ruthless businesswoman. She had coal pits on her land. She had about 400 acres, and she rented them out, or they tried to get her to rent them out to other business people. And she'd been managing this estate for quite a while. Her sister had done it, and then her sister would be like pissed off at Anne when Anne would come back. She said, like, I was taking care of Dad and Aunt Lister and Anne, and now you're back here saying that you're going to be in charge. And she was annoyed with that. They argued a lot. But Anne did manual labor at Shipton. Actually, the manual laborers and the people who worked there liked the fact that she did that. How did she have clean hands from that? I don't get that. She says, I've been happier here than anywhere else. And here's another beautiful picture of it. Here's a really lovely picture of this place. Let's go there. Looks cool. There it is again. And she also built a little private moss house on the ground so that she could have sex there with women. Because, when you have a big house like this, you got servants and people are walking around and stuff. So you get a little bungalow out in the woods, it would be fun. She said, I was born like this. Why should I compromise myself? And she's talking about her lesbian tendencies. It wasn't just a tendency. She identified as a woman who loved women. She indicated that she did not want to be a man or a husband. And Anne was really not I don't think if she had lived today, she would have been transmasculine. Tib would have been. I think there's no question about that. But Anne really said that because people frequently said, you should have been born a man. And she said, I don't want to be a man. She saw only friendships and romantic relationships with women. She was really friends with women. She said, I cannot live without female company, without someone to interest me. She said this little thing. Were you going to say this? No. She said that I could not sleep last night, dozing, hot and disturbed. A violent longing for a female companion came over me. Never remember feeling it so painfully before. It was absolute pain to me. Yeah, we've all been there. And what a comfort, she says, what a comfort this journal. I tell myself to myself and throw the burden on my book and feel relieved. I know my own heart. I was born like this. Why should I compromise? So let's put that up on the wall. Why should I compromise myself? She meets Anne Walker, and the attraction is palpable. Anne Walker is her next door neighbor. She's actually a very, very wealthy young woman because all the men have died. And so now she is the young heiress of the Walker estate. And in fact, her family was very, very rich, which added to the attraction, I have to say. So she had a lot of money, way more than 800 a year. She probably had 3 or 4 times that. She has money, and this might make up for rank because her family were just in trade. They weren't aristocrats. But Anne's thinking, well, she's got a lot of money. We could get on very well. In fact, she's the perfect partner, and her wealth certainly had a magnetic draw. There she is. There's Sophie Rundle playing her in Gentleman Jack. Anne could travel and finish her designs on Shipton Hall if she was with Ann Walker, and she loved Ann Walker. She met her, she fell in love with her, she seduced her, and she did it fast. This was no 6 year thing. It was 2 months. And she was on her. In fact, right in her journal, she walked, after meeting her, she walked home and wrote in her journal that she was fantasizing about taking Anne to bed. Yeah, perhaps after all, she will make me happier than any of my former flames, she wrote in her journal. After 2 months of courting, yeah. The problem was that Ann Walker had a lot of religious issues. She was the opposite of Anne Lister in that she believed over and over again. She had a couple of problems, but she believed over and over again that she was doing something wrong with regard to religion, being a lover of Anne. And they slept together and they had sex. But she also had a lot of serious mental health issues that had she been alive today, she could have been treated for and probably would successfully, but she really had major problems. And this is her aunt. This is Anne's aunt, and of course her name is Ann Walker. They all are named Anne, for heaven's sakes. So she's with Ann Walker, and she says, "I want you to live with me for the rest of my life." And Anne says, "I can't decide. I don't know. So she says, "Well, I'm going to go away for a while. You make up your mind. I don't know. I can't deal with it." And she's upset because she couldn't deal with it. There's a lot of problems with this, and she's really trying to help Ann Walker, but she can't. So she goes on a trip with the Hobart family, and she meets the Queen of Denmark. No kidding. This is the Queen of Denmark, Marie of Denmark. And then she's at a big ball at her house, and she's dancing with a woman there. This is from Gentleman Jack, but this really happened. This really happened that she did this in Copenhagen. This is actually a painting of the Queen of Denmark, who did apparently have attraction to women. And then she comes back to Halifax, and she marries her. And Walker says, "Yeah, I'm ready. Okay, let's do it." And she marries her. And they marry by taking the sacrament together. And this is in 1834, and they commit their lives to each other, and they stay together for the rest of Anne Lister's life. They travel to Europe. This is a kind of a long, long honeymoon. They go to Europe and then to Russia together. And then, there they are coming out. This is from Gentleman Jack. There they are leaving the church after they've been wed. And she goes to Russia. She goes all through Europe, and then she goes to Russia. And in 1839, they go through to Russia, and they go after they've gone through Germany, Belgium, Sweden, and Finland. But then Anne gets sick. And we don't know what happened to her, but we do know that there was plague. There was a potential of like a tick bite. There could be a potential of other kinds of fever, but she got a fever and she died in Georgia, which is the far part of Russia. And what happened really is that she was in an extraordinarily rural, small town, and there weren't no doctors there. She'd been in Moscow. They might have been able to save her. And after that, Ann Walker had to bring her body home. And she brought her home. It took 8 months to get her home. And in the trip, in order to get her to get through, it was she's moving a dead body in a coffin. And at one point, they have to stop for 3 months. So they bury the coffin. And then when she's ready to go on, she digs it up again and takes it with her to Shipton Hall. And so Anne is buried at Shipton Hall. I want to say this one thing about writing journals, and Michelle's going to tell you some great things about the journal, but if you're going to write with a quill pen, you have to make it. And you make it with, what is this? I haven't asked you any questions so you can win stuff. What is this called? It's a penknife. Yes, give Carmen a prize. So it's a penknife. That's why it's called a penknife. It's for carving pens. So you have to take your penknife and you have to carve it out of this quill. It's time consuming, and you have to take all the feathery stuff off, and then you have to carve it into this shape. And probably every morning Anne got up and made her, because when you use pens like this, they don't last. They could probably do a page at most of the presentation of the writing, and then you have to use another one. She probably made herself 10 pens a day. I also want to just say, throw this in because Michelle's going to take over, but I'm going to say this really quick thing. It's believed that Anne, for a long time, it was believed that when Anne built that tower on her house, she never got to see it because it was being built while she was going with Anne Walker to Russia. But the Lister sisters, which is one of Michelle's lot, just recently found in her journal that Anne and Anne did get to be in the tower, and that Anne Walker even painted a little painting in it, and they just found that in the journal. So now it's Michelle's turn, and she's going to talk about the next part. I'm going to put this right here for you. There you go. Is that your way?
All right. Is that?
There you go.
Okay.
Wait, whoa.
Yeah. Closed captioning, Genevieve asked.
Okay.
What? Oh, it's on? Okay, then never mind. Sorry about that.
No worries. Okay. I'm going to do a little bit more reading than Liz because I'm not as proficient of a speaker, and I'm doing a lot of quotes from the journal. So my name is Michelle Mecham, and I'm going to tell you about the journal, how we got how the translations came about, and then we'll talk about what's in there. So, well, let's see. So that's, oh, these are more pictures of Shibden Hall, but we'll get there.
That's the library that they actually did create. And that's the view that she had from her library.
Okay, there we go. So, as Liz said, and Lister said, I love and only love the fair sex, and thus beloved by them. In turn, my heart revolts from any other love than theirs. And these are the words of Anne Lister, estate owner, industrialist, scholar, traveler, and the world's first modern lesbian. So, as Liz said, she began journaling in 1806, continued until her death in 1840, and 26 volumes long, about 5 million words, and 1/6 of it in secret code. And when she died, the journals were hidden in the walls of Shibden Hall, where they remained for 50 years until this guy, John Lister, a distant relative, had inherited the house, and another man, Arthur Burrell, who were friends, they found the hidden diaries and the secret code. With the secret code. So they found the diaries, they realized there was a secret code, and they found a scrap of paper that said, God is my, and then 4 symbols. They figured out that these symbols spelled the word hope, and from there they were able to figure out most of what Anne called her crypt hand. What they discovered in the journals shocked them. The encrypted writing was an account of Anne Lister's romantic and sexual relations with other women. Homosexuality was illegal then, and so they considered burning the books. The 2 men were likely gay and could not risk the attention on their own relationship if this got out. So they decided instead to put them back in the walls of the house, and we are so glad that they did. So John Lister died 45 years later. They were still in the walls all this time in 1933. And Shibden Hall was donated to the Halifax Town Council. And the journals were rediscovered when they were in there cataloging the contents of the house. Arthur Burrell gave them a copy of the code, and he let them know that he would be burning his copy. So the one they had was it. So the journals and the copy of the code were sent to the West Yorkshire Archives Service for storage. And for the next 50 years again, Different librarians and researchers decoded passages from the journals and no doubt discovered some things that were too risque to be revealed at the time. So in the mid-1980s, now this is when I was a teenager, a local Halifax woman named Helena Whitbread, she was looking for a project to keep her mind sharp, and she knew of Shibden Hall and Ann Lister, and so she began going to the library to read some letters that Anne had wrote that were there. So one day a librarian asked Helena if she knew that Anne had also kept a journal. And Helena was intrigued and she took home a copy of the code and 50 pages of the journal. And over the next 5 years, she would go on to decode thousands of pages of the journal. And then she published a book in defiance of a British law known as Section 28, which was passed that very same year, that banned the promotion of homosexuality. She is a badass. She doesn't maybe look like a badass, but in my mind, she is. And so she published a book of excerpts called I Know My Own Heart, from the quote that Liz showed us, and then another called No Priest But Love, and that references her marriage to Anne Walker. So these books covered the years from 1816 to about 1826, when Anne was about 25 to 30 years old. And Helena was just instrumental to shedding light on the lives of 19th century lesbians. And she continues to play a vital role in bringing Ann Lister to life. And here she is inside Shibden Hall in Ann Lister's actual bedroom, giving an interview. And this is current. She's still alive and she's still a huge part of the Gentleman Jack phenomenon and translating the journals. So yeah, then I just love her and I like to give her a little bit of time. So then Jill Liddington comes along. She's a feminist and an academic, and she got involved and wrote a series of books that cover 1832, when she got back into Shibden Hall from her travels, till about 1836. And her work is a little more analytical and it adds depth and context to what we know about Ann Lister. But again, the secrets were largely hidden and forgotten again by just, everybody just sort of didn't really pay much attention to it until comes along Sally Wainwright. And she is a British television writer and director. And she took the words of Ann Lister and turned them into a television series about her life. And in the late 90s, she pitched the idea, but it was rejected. She continued to work on it. And finally, in 2019, all of her work came to fruition. And Gentleman Jack was released on the BBC in England and on HBO for those of us here in the colonies. And so there we see, she just looks so great. So the name of the show comes from the fact that Ann Lister was a member of the landed gentry, and they often had titles like ladies or gentlemen. And Jack, which was a slang term for butch or masculine lesbians in the 1800s. So the series is very well done. It stars some very talented and well-known British actors, and it's shot on location in Shibden Hall, which is really, features beautiful costumes and authentic details. And, it just really brings Ann Lister to life for me. And here are different visions of Ann Lister. So we saw this first picture that was painted in her own time. We see Sally Wainwright's vision of Ann Lister in Gentleman Jack. There she is again in the Secret Diaries of Ann Lister. And this one, this is an artificial intelligence rendition of Ann Lister made with a computer program and based on existing portraits of her. And it's done by like a Dutch artist, and I can't even begin to say his name. But you can Google that, So all of this has inspired a real sense of connection among many people, particularly many lesbians and we call ourselves the Lister Sisters. And here is just some inspiration, fan art, statues. Women are getting tattoos that say, I love and only love the fairer sex. Just a very inspiring thing. So all of this, well, I sort of lost my place. One moment. So they started the West Yorkshire Archive Service started the transcription project to try to get all of the diaries transcribed. And they believed that they would probably be at it for about 20 years. But because of all the interest in the show, it's almost complete. All the pages are out, being translated in 2 years. So here's pictures of what the people that are translating are looking at. That's her actual journal there, and you can see some of her crypt hand there. So now we're getting there, I promise you. So Miss Lister recorded everything in her journal, and I do mean everything. Typical journal. There's comments about the weather, her state business, her studies, her travels, just everything. But there are things that she had to write in code. Let me see. So what was in the journals that demanded it be locked away for 175 years? What was this proper English lady doing that was so risque that it inspired pearl clutching from all who read it? Well, that is what we are about to find out. Yes. Let's see. So Miss Lister developed the secret code, or what she called her crypt hand, and she felt that it could never be decrypted. So she used a combination of Greek and algebraic symbols in place of individual letters to write about her relationships with other women. And here is where it gets very juicy. And these are not your mother's romantic friendships. So Liz just told us about Anne's first girlfriend, Eliza Rain, and she told us about Anne going with Mariana Belcom on her honeymoon. Well, on that honeymoon, Anne shared a room with Mariana's sister, also named Anne, and she wrote in code, Anne sat beside me and lay upon me on the bed until 3 a.m, I teasing and behaving rather amorously to her. She would gladly have gotten to bed with me and done anything else of the loving kind I asked. Now, in addition to crypt hand letters, Miss Lister often used whole words or symbols for code. So we know that she used the word kiss to mean much more than just a simple peck. She used the word kiss to mean sexual pleasure. So here is the symbol that's on the sides in the margins of her journals. And she says, in November, and this is on November of the same honeymoon, she writes in crypt hand again, had a very good kiss last night and gave it to me with pleasure, not thinking it necessary to refuse me any longer. There you see the little code. Yeah. Okay. So on yet another night that same month, she notes, had a very good kiss last night and has always an abundance of moisture and never fails to give me full gratification. Over the next several years, Anne spent a lot of time trying to mend her broken heart with help from the young ladies in and around Halifax. There were lectures and long walks with Mrs. Brown. There were deep conversations with Isabella Norcliffe. And then there was flirting with Miss Valence at a house party. At one of those house parties in 1818, Anne went to Miss Valence's bedroom to wish her a good night. Okay, so here's where she's writing on it. We're zooming in on a little section of what she has written in code, and we see the translation. And she says, went to Miss V at 9:15, holding her on my knee, sucking her right breast and kissing her. I once put my tongue a very little way into her mouth. I asked her to kiss me, and she did. The very next evening, she goes to Miss Valence again and writes, sat by bedside, sucking her left breast and kissing her most warmly. All the while she fidgeting about, nestled near me. You know, balance is key. So, and Lister used the words in ways that are different than how we use them today, and even different from how they were used in our own time. So one of these words, is queer. So we know that the meaning of the word queer has changed over time. In Miss Lister's day, it meant something odd or unusual, but she gave it a meaning all her own. In 1824, Anne had gone to Paris to experience the laid-back attitude about sex. While she was there, she met a young widow named Mrs. Barlow. They spent a lot of time together and really hit it off, as we see in this entry from February 1825. I put my face to her and twice got queer into my mouth and just sucked the tip of it. And even developed some of her own words. So for example, grubbling. This seems to be a word that she invented to mean pleasuring a woman with her hands, and she uses it whether she means externally or internally. And Mrs. Barlow is again the inspiration for a coded entry. I began to handle her and look at her, licked a little bit of her queer, and opened her with my finger. What? I don't know. Okay, here we go.
Press the button.
Oh,
Then
the
it'll work
button.
better.
Good. Okay. The down.
We keep going. We did this already.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, now. There.
Grubbling. That's where we are.
And we're up to this.
Yes.
There. Now press that when you're doing
The down.
it. Yeah, the down.
Okay. So licked a little bit of her queer, opened her with my fingers and slavered into her. Then grubbled, looking all the while, and gave her good excitement. Yet another coded phrase Anne uses is incurred a cross. Oh. Yes. So this phrase she uses in crypt handwriting. There's another journal entry with the little cross there in the margin, right there. And she says, I'm sorry. Sometimes I get a little ahead of myself. So sometimes it's just the little cross in the corner, and sometimes there's a bit of a story to it, such as when she's thinking of other women. As much as she was enjoying her time with Miss Barlow, Mariana was still on her mind, and she writes, went to Miss Barlow for about an hour, right middle finger up almost all the time. Gave her 2 or 3 long excitements, returned to my own bed, thought of Mariana, and incurred a cross. So, Anne had a great time in Paris, but eventually she had to return home. A few months later, Mariana came and visited for a few weeks, and they reconnected, but of course, she was saddened when Mariana had to leave yet again. And so as a way to have a small token of remembrance, a gift exchange was in order. Anne writes, Mariana cut the hair from her own queer. We know what that meant, right? And I from mine. which we put into little lockets that we got for us to always wear under our clothes in mutual remembrance. So Anne spent the next few years traveling through Europe and spent quite a bit of time in Paris focusing on her studies. One area of particular interest was anatomy, specifically female anatomy. And in February of 1831, she writes in code, "Incurred a cross thinking of Mariana. It was from studying the female organs of generation and finding distinctly for the first time in my life the clitoris." On another occasion, Miss Lister writes in crip hand, "I had the fingers of my right hand pushed in as far as they would go up queer. Distinctly felt the stones of ovaria." Now, Liz and I have talked about this and we're both a little puzzled. So if anyone here knows what the stones of ovaria are, please see us after the presentation. So in May of 1832, at age 41, Anne Lister returned to Halifax to make some improvements to the estate, as Liz mentioned. And through some family friends, she met Anne Walker, a wealthy young heiress and neighbor. And the two women began spending time together, and Miss Lister began considering her as a possible companion. By August, she wrote, "I wonder if I can at all mold her to my own way." Now, September was a very busy time for Miss Lister, and she writes, "September 7th, incurred a cross thinking of Miss Walker. September 20th, incurred a cross thinking of Miss Walker. September 26th, you guessed it, incurred a cross thinking of Miss Walker." So there they are together. So by now, Anne Lister was seriously courting Anne Walker, but on October 4th, Miss Walker made her move and invited Miss Lister over to her place for dinner. So there's a little romance there. She wore an evening gown and she had a nice meal waiting when Miss Lister arrived. After dinner, Miss Lister writes in code, "We were so affectionate. We let the lamp go out. Long continued kissing. I pressed her bosom, then finding no resistance and the lamp being out, let my hand wander down lower, gently getting to her queer." Things progressed quickly, and on October 11th, 1832, so that's just a couple of months, she writes, as it became dusk, we crept closer, and I, without any resistance, got for the first time, right middle finger up her queer at 3 separate times. The two women loved each other, and together they faced many trials that threatened their relationship. This is another little piece of fan art. And in March of 1834, they exchanged rings and took sacrament together as a sign of their commitment to each other. Their passion continued for many years of their married life. From Miss Lister's journals, it can sometimes seem like she was always the one initiating sex. And the shy little Miss Walker was always passive, but that is not the case. A coded entry from September of 1837, now they've been married a few years, says, "Slept with Anne and she lay upon me. I grubbled, or rather handled and excited her, she being the promoter." But marriage isn't always the whirlwind of dating and courtship. And Miss Lister notes that in March of 1838, incurred a cross last night very quietly while Anne was snoring. I'm sure some of us can relate to that. So the couple went on to travel extensively throughout Europe. And by 1840, Miss Walker had become quite a seasoned explorer. In Miss Lister's last journal entry on October 11th, 1840, she writes that Miss Walker woke up early and ordered the horses for the next leg of their trip. And in a final statement of affection, Miss Lister writes in code that Miss Walker did a good job. Ann Lister died shortly after that, but she left her journals as a testament to lesbian life in the 1800s. Ann Lister was a woman of intelligence, passion, strength, and self-determination. She is an inspiration for lesbians all across the world, and she has a message for us if only we can decode it. So,
I really love talking to Michelle about this because we just would go on and on and on forever talking about this. I do want to say, next week is going to be Frank Lloyd Wright and Falling Water. And then after that will be Oz from Book to Liz. But here's the thing, and thanks for watching from Liz. What's my middle name? Ann, that's right. I'm one of the Ann clan. So so let's turn up the lights and you all have, yes.
I had a guess who would the ovarian stones are.
Oh, great. Okay, we do want to hear that. I'm going to go back. Go ahead.
I think it's the G spot.
Okay. It's really stones.
In there, you can kind of.
Okay, well, that's okay. I was thinking like, we were saying ovary exam, like an ovary exam.
pelvic exam.
But who knows?
That's my guess.
I like the guess. I'm totally fine with that guess. Does anybody else have any questions? Because we're going to do something really fun next. But let's see if there's any questions. Anything on the chat? Because I see there's like 29 things on the chat. Has anybody got a question? Oh, the chat is happy. Thank you, happy people on the chat. Only one of us Zoom people. We'll stop and look at you in a minute. But this is what we're going to do next. So take out your green sheets and take out your pens because we're going to decode this thing. Now, I have a really great Victorian sewing implement. It's actually from the Victorian period. And it's a figural sewing scissors. And the person that's going to win this, who can decode this. And I'm going to actually make it like this. There it is. You can see it there. And while you're decoding it, I'm going to play this music. And when the music's done, now if you get it, just raise your hand and one of our fabulous volunteers will check it, but don't shout it out. See if you can decode it. These women in this little thing are actually the women who wrote this music. Oh shit. I'm sorry. The world heard me say that. But they also heard, Michelle say queer like 27 times about your finger up here. Okay, here you go. If you're not doing this, you can sing along, but don't sing so loud that you will get germs on you. Gentlemen friends, the fair is sex and every smell that were bright. She held them tight, that's the man seduced them well. Oh, gentlemen Jack, watch your back, you're under attack. The husbands are coming, you better start running, for nobody likes a Jack the Lass. Jack the Lass, Jack the Lass, nobody likes a Jack the Lass. The cold is crap, she likes the back. The knives are out, but gentlemen clicks on the three dots,
Yeah.
and then it says
Do
open.
we have the answer? Someone up there thinks they have the answer.
We'll go and look at what it is. Go find out what it
I
is.
did.
Okay, hold on. Other people are raising their hands. I think the first, did you get the first person? I don't know. We're gonna wait till the end of the song.
Wait, keep your hands up if you think you got it, right?
Yeah, well, people check everybody and you can win a wait because you won't be the first person, because I think, we'll see who's first. Check everybody who's raising their hand.
Raise them high. That's not bad.
You're under attack, the husband. The birds are running, but nobody likes Jack the Lass. Jack the Lass, Jack the Lass. Nobody likes Jack the Lass. His bags are packed. Around for Jack the Lass. Okay. Okay, so great. Now, okay, so who was the first one? Red sweatshirt. What was it? Yes, that's right. Okay, so, and that was the first one, right? So they get this prize. And anybody else who got it, if everybody's checked it, I think we have 12 wades, so we can give those out to those people. And the person with the wade, so come over here, Emma, and give, I forgot your name, red sweatshirt guy. What is it? Kyle. Kyle's the winner. Very good, Kyle. That's the right one, right? Wait a minute, wait, let me be sure that's the right thing. Yes, it is, okay. So, okay, it is indeed, anybody else that got it. So if you raised your hand, you can pick a wade. So you go around and get those people who got the thing. Go around again and get those. Do any other people have any questions about that? I'm going to quit this now, and so we can see the gang. I'm going to stop sharing. What does this say? New share? Oh no, stop share. Okay. There's everybody. Hi, everybody. Let's see everybody. Oh, that's great. Okay. Does anybody have any questions there? I can't. Let me put the chat up so I can watch the chat. Who else is there? We had about 50 people on, if you count the people online, which is so terrific. We love seeing that. Nobody has any questions. I have to say that I know a little bit about Ann Lister. Michelle knows everything about, like I would say, like, well, when did they do this? You have the exact date. You mean with the Cheshire thing when they did the 3 steps and it was on April 3rd, 1823. She's amazing about it. So she's the one to ask. And if you have any questions about Ann Lister, it would be really terrific. And yes, go ahead. We have a question.
Was she able to get treated for the syphilis?
Well, that's a great thing. So we actually did discuss that, because the treatment for syphilis in those days was, does anybody know what it was? Huh? Arsenic. Dr. Elizabeth Goff says arsenic. I don't think that's what it was. It was probably worse than that. So what was it? Yeah, which is mercury, right? Yeah, it's mercury. Mercury salve, which is a poison, actually. I don't know why they used that and if it did anything, but so you wanted to say.
Yeah, she also used a syringe a lot
Step over here
to
so you don't.
flush her queer, in her words. And then she would comment every single time that she did a treatment to herself, whether it was the mercury or the syringe. She would comment like 2 or 3 drops today of discharge. She would comment on the color of it, how often it was happening, if it affected her bowels, and anything related to it, anything.
What?
Syphilis have long-term like mental health repercussions?
It can. The thing is that it also can go into remission for 30 years. And so that could have happened with her as well. But one of the things that Michelle was saying was, when she was telling me this, that for several years, she talked about it all the time. And then she stopped talking about it. And she wouldn't have stopped talking about it if she had been suffering from it. Because she, don't you think? I mean,
Yes.
like she talked about
She talked
every
about- yes.
single illness, possible circumstance, unpleasant things.
I have to tell them, okay. She also would comment about if she was worried about giving it to one of her other partners, she would write about the specific moves that she did with this woman to keep herself away from her so that she wouldn't pass it on.
Yeah.
But her and Mariana could keep on as usual
Because they both had
because they
it.
both had it, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, she knew that she had gotten it from Mariana.
Yeah.
And she was really worried about that.
yeah, so they could just, yeah.
That's what we know. So, I mean, that's a tricky thing because you want to shout into the diary, don't do that. That's going to make you the leeches. Now, it's not going to work because they did the leeches thing all over the
All the
They're
time.
always doing. Shall I call the leech woman? I mean, that's what Ann said to her at one point when she was depressed. Shall I call the leech woman?
There's an online question.
Online question.
From Mary Akiko.
Okay.
Is there
Mary?
any research on whether she knew Lady Clementina Howard?
You know that?
I'm
Neither
not
of us
familiar
have
with that at
heard of
all.
that. And I have to say that Michelle knows everything, so probably, we don't know that. Now, it is possible because there's 4.5 million words in the journal. And that thing about them finding, like somebody was just one of the many, many Lister sisters, what they would do is they'd send you 3 pages and literally hundreds of people were carefully going through it. And one of the things you could notice from the journal entries is there's no punctuation. So some of it is actually interpretive about what is happening in it. And so at one point, one of the Lister sisters was in translating, and it could have been one of the ones who translated loads of pages, but all of a sudden said, hey, they did see the library.
Yeah.
Because they really believe that they've never been in. So all of a sudden, and this is a new thing that just happened in the last year that somebody felt that information out.
Yeah.
So it's certainly possible that could happen, and we just don't know about it because they don't know that much about it.
Well, they're being transcribed in chronological order, so there's still a lot in the later years that are out for transcription, but have not been completed, have not been checked and uploaded to the diaries.
Yeah, that's a good point. That was a great question, though. I wish we knew everything about that.
So apparently Howard was photographing women in tableau and drag.
What was the question?
Just let you read it.
Oh,
There's a
okay.
lot of weird words in it.
So small. Let's see. I can see it.
Okay.
Which one is it? Oh,
Well, it's
Howarden was
yeah.
photographing women in tableau in drag. Huh. I don't think that it's possible, but there wasn't in Ann Lister's life, people weren't photographing people. So if you're talking about like Muybridge, where they have the horse running or the guys dancing or something, that was about 6 years later after Ann's death. So the first selfie was taken in 1839. Anne died in 1841. Is that right? Is that right?
40.
40. So she died the next year. And the first selfie was a guy who figured out how to do this and then stood still for several hours.
Right.
So they could get the image on his of his face. So it's pretty rare that there would be much photography happening in her lifetime. That's a good question.
She did see the bicycle and the first trains.
Yeah.
And it's very, very funny how she describes the bicycle because they didn't call it the bicycle and it really wasn't a word. So she just goes into a description of it and she's like, it's under the power of his own movement. And, she's just going on and on describing it. And it's really interesting to me to see that considering what an important role bicycles played in feminism and women's rights later on.
Just a few years later.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so amazing. Yeah, here's a question.
How accurate do you think the Gentleman Jack series is?
Okay, so this person is asking, how accurate do you think that the BBC Gentleman Jack series is? Well, here's one thing that's not accurate. She didn't really wear a top hat. And Sally Wainwright actually said in an interview, she wore a hat that was absolutely masculine, but nobody today would recognize it as a masculine hat. So we had her wear a top hat so that people would see that as a masculine hat. On the other hand, these people really valued the scholarship. This was actually shot in Shibden Hall. And the only place I didn't shoot was the bedroom because it was so small, they couldn't get in there to take the pictures because they couldn't set up the cameras. But this was really shot in Shibden's Hall. It really uses the work of Helena Whitford, who was really amazing. She's 90 now, and she spent 32 years going through every single page of the diary. And she's brilliant when she talks about it. And it's particularly interesting when you read stuff that's written by people who, she has a daughter who's a lesbian. There's different people who have really studied the diaries, and people who are kind of on the outside of queerness write about Anne in a very different way than people who understand lesbian life, even if it's 180 years later. And so it's really interesting to see, like Mother Anne and Shoma, who wrote the information that was actually made into the movie. Is that right?
Well, Anne Shoma wrote a companion book to
Right,
the
right.
series. So the series was based on the work of Jill Liddington and covers those
Right.
years, but then Anne Shoma wrote the companion book. So you can actually go through and like see where the quotes that are
Right.
in the movie, what dates they're taken from exactly, and different people that are like side stories, they're tweaked a little bit to just keep the story
audio
moving
book, too.
forward, but they are real people that were part of her life. And I'm talking like some of the farmers and handymen and, outside characters like that. But with the women in her lives, yeah, very, very accurate, much in her own
Because Anne
words.
Shoma is a lesbian, and she writes from the point of view of, this is a normal thing, or this wouldn't be strange for somebody to do, as opposed to other people would say, well, this is predatory, or that she's such a snob that she would say this, and it's just not a very sensitive thing. And Anne Shoma was a historian even before she wrote the companion book, so she worked closely with Helena Whitford and stuff like that. It's really interesting to see these different women that are working on this project. It's so fascinating.
So in this series, does it make sense that she would have just started courting Anne Walker, and then in the middle of that, she needs to go to the wedding of the ex-lover who called her Fred?
Yeah. So, yeah.
Is that what,
Do you
is
wanna
that
do
what
that, or-
happens?
Well,
I think,
And then she was with
no, the wedding is earlier.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, you can.
So Mariana's wedding was in 1816, and she didn't start to court Anne Walker until
1832.
1832. She's no good. It slips it together very quickly, and it cuts these different vignettes. But she's pretty much serial monogamy, unless she just feels like this person is just not responding to me. But the thing about Anne Walker that was happening was that, that's a long story, but it definitely happens in Gentleman Jack, where, and this is true, that Anne Walker cannot make up her mind about whether or not they should be together, and she's jacking her around really over and over again until finally she just says, I'm going to Copenhagen. I'm just going away for 2 months. And then she does have a big financial problem, and everything's bad. She thinks the relationship is over. And then she has all these financial problems and everything. And she comes back, and Anne Walker is there and says, okay, I'm ready. Let's do it. I really want to do this. And she's happy to see her. And one of the things she says over and over again is, even though this young woman drives me crazy, every time I see her, I'm unhinged. She's
Yes.
absolutely in love with him.
Yes.
And there's no question.
It's almost like, God, it's almost like when somebody just, you love them so much, but they kind of drive you crazy. And, there's just all this passion every which way. And
It was not an easy relationship, but it was a devoted
No.
relationship.
And ironically, Anne Walker, after they were married, Anne Walker had a little bit of a breakdown herself, ended up in the same, I don't want to say
Lunatic
asylum,
It
but
was an asylum.
yeah, But it was apparently one of the nicer ones, and it was run by Mariana's brother, and Eliza Rain was also there.
The younger woman that she had first been with. And Steph Belcom was Mariana's brother. And he was the doctor who ran the asylum. And one of the reasons that happens is they're just in one area. And these are the aristocracy, and these are the people who are the professionals. And she knows them all because she's in town, and it's not that big a population. These are great questions. Anybody else have any other terrific questions? Yes, Allison.
You had said that she started wearing black
Mhm.
once,
Mariana gets married, yeah, in
and she
1860.
wore it for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Did she mention that she was still in mourning? Because it sounds like, she wasn't still
Okay,
in mourning.
so here's a
and
great
it
story.
became her-
No, that's absolutely. So here she goes to Copenhagen and she sees Queen Marie of Denmark. And she's introduced to her. This is really happens. And Queen Marie says, so you're wearing black. However Danish accent sounds. And she says, yes, I wear black. She says, why are you wearing black? And she says, well, I was in love with someone and they married someone else. And so Queen Marie says, so you're in mourning for a love lost. And she says, yes. She says, how long? 17 years. That's how long it's been. So yeah.
Yes.
I don't think it never ended for her.
But I
Also,
think
there's a couple of other things. She tromped through the countryside day in and day out. If you're not wearing black, it shows on your dress hem, first of all. Second thing, she wrote in her diary every day. And when you write with a quill pen, it squirts all over you. It spits on you. Most women who, and you probably know that, Allison, because we do that in art school. Most women of the day were white, but you would get ink all over you. And she spent hours and hours writing. So I'm sure after she wore this black, she went, yeah, this works pretty well. This is a pretty good thing. Plus, it made her look more forceful and more masculine.
Absolutely.
And I think she wanted to set herself apart from other people in an understandable way. But she
yes.
always wore dresses, and people would say, well, you could wear pants. She said, no, I don't want to wear pants.
I think it was a practical choice. Besides the mourning, it was also practical because the ladies that she liked, they would be spending a lot of time indoors because they were very protected young ladies. They were tutored at home, they painted at home, they had, beautiful gardens, but they were very sort of sequestered, upper class ladies. And she walked everywhere. She was outside all the time, working on her estate, talking to the men that were working, making sure everything was going just right. And she walked and walked and walked everywhere.
Yeah.
She had horses,
mountains.
and she had a carriage. So I'm not sure why she walked everywhere, unless it was just what she liked to do, or if it was more fashionable at the time.
It was cheaper too.
Yeah, but the dirt and everything, like Liz said. Yeah.
So and I think it was cheaper too, because she was actually frugal, and because she had to live within her means, even not the only time that stopped is when she was with Ann Walker, and Ann Walker had a lot more money and she was in control of it. She became in control of the money because in a way that's what Ann Walker wanted, but she was a little reticent about that too. Who else has a question? Anybody else? That was a great question. Anybody else? What time is it? We are just past 8 o'clock. I am so happy that everybody could be on this. We've had over 50, I think we have over 50 people altogether on this event, which is a big event for us. Last time we had well over 50 people. So how exciting that you are all here. I hope you can all be here next week for Frank Lloyd Wright. And then for the Oz one, which will be the last week, which will be just after the holidays. So by 2 days after the holidays, you'll be really tired of your family, and I'm sure you'll want to be in a queer space. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you, everybody.